We are seeing a lot of changes today. As a writer, I can tell you that since they invented this way of communication, meaning we talk to each other, then we go through the oral tradition, then we start telling stories. People are capable of remembering stories. Then finally, we managed to write the stories, and to cut a long story short, we go to the book. This technological invention that started under its printing form in the 16th century, if I'm not wrong. And since then, we have books as books, and all of a sudden, everything changed. You still have the message. You still have something to share. You still have something to pass to each other. But now you can do that in a tweet, in 140 characters. At the end of the day, the goal of keeping some ideals and values alive is basically to share our human condition. And either we writers adapt ourselves to this, to be able to write 10-second stories as I do in Facebook, to be able to write 140 character sentences as I do in Twitter, or we die. Because people in 100 years from now, they're not going to read books as we see. They will force it, but just for academical purposes, and then scholars are going to study books, but the message and the way that you pass this message is changing. Let's go back to 10 seconds stories, to 140 characters, or even less in the future.
Cool. So we were talking just before we'd actually met a couple years ago, very briefly, and then we just got reconnected, literally 5 minutes before we began this talk. And in those 5 minutes, we realized we actually agreed about a lot of things, and we said, "Okay, great. We agree on enough things that we can go. Let's start." One of the things that I believe, which I think is a pretty contrarian idea for someone in my position to take, is that So I build platforms. I'm not a writer. Actually, it's notable that I don't currently have a blog, and I don't really use Twitter. So I'm not actually producing content, but I believe producing content is actually really important. I'm someone who builds platforms so that others can get their content experienced by, the largest possible audience. But the thing that we both really agree on is that these platforms, when they're done correctly, are basically neutral platforms. They don't take one perspective one way or the other. And in fact, to the extent that they do take a perspective, they ultimately lose their power. And this sort of begs a question, which we could maybe come back to later in the conversation about, is Mark Zuckerberg actually the most powerful person in the world? Or is the fact that his platform must be completely neutral, does that in some way limit his power? But we'll come back to that. So the one thing which we both believe in is that at the end of the day, the power is still held by those creating content, who are actually creating ideas. To change people's minds, you still have to say something. What's new and different and exciting about this, about social media, the thing that's really, I think what underlies the hype, everybody talks about the big numbers, the $50 billion valuation, Facebook hitting 600 million users. There's all of this, all these economic and business reasons to think Facebook is really interesting. There's all these reasons that we think Twitter is really interesting because of the scale. We get really excited about technology for its own sake and the transformational power of technology. But what's really interesting to me, and I say this as someone who just doesn't have time to create content, but wishes he did, what's really interesting is that for the first time, the three traditional roles that were held by different parts of the media, which is production of content, the distribution of content, and then the editorialization around content, the commentary. Those three roles used to be separate, and they used to be held by people who were in positions of power and not by the average person. And with social media, for the first time, we see all three of those traditional media roles held by everyone on an unprecedented scale, which means that there is a huge shift in power. It represents the potential for a huge shift in power. But where this relates back to sort of the work that Paulo has done is that ultimately it's going to be up to the users of the technology to do something with that power and to change people's minds, to use these platforms to shift values in a meaningful way.
I can give you a very concrete example about the importance of platforms. Exactly 10 days ago, I got an email from my publisher in Iran saying that my books were banned in the country. It happens to be a false alarm. The books are not banned. The publisher is banished. But the books are still allowed. So, but when I got this email, I said, what can I do? And I said, easy. I'm going to put them online for free, which I did immediately. I have a blog that it is paulocoelhoblog.com, and I put all my books in Farsi for free till we clarify the situation. So there, and I'm going to leave it there, even if the books are not forbidden. The publisher is, so till we solve the situation with the problem, anyone who reads Farsi can go there and download the books, all of them. So what happens to us is that we can overlap some circumstances that 10, 20 years ago, it would be totally impossible. When you mentioned that we had production, distribution, editorial, in the future, this is going to happen. But please remember, we're going to be the publisher, the editorialist, and the distributor. But remember that at the end of the day, you have to focus in the creative side. If we start not only creating content, but then finding a way how to distribute it, and then how to monetize it, we are lost. So we still need the two faces of the coin to move forward, sharing what you said, and I think it is very important. You said upstairs, values. Sean and I were discussing about values, how the society is going towards a society that has no values anymore. And we have to stick to values because at the end of the day, ethics needs to prevail. And that's it.
Yeah, I think Facebook's role in the world is not to take an ethical position, but to try to remain a neutral platform. Now, to the extent that there's a government that doesn't believe that in freedom of speech, in freedom of expression, and that directly contradicts Facebook's most basic or the most basic purpose of any neutral platform or service provider, then obviously there's going to be the seeds of a conflict there. But with regard to all other issues, the belief in freedom of information is the belief that if you can have a free and open discourse, then ultimately you can let people come to the right decision. Now, you actually said something to me which I recall from Davos a couple years ago. You said that a writer wants their work to be read.
Absolutely.
That's the most important thing to a writer. And I've given this a lot of thought with regard to the music industry. I think Napster ended up being a failure of a company, but was an important cultural event. And as we started thinking about, what's the model for recorded music in the future, and I started meeting more and more artists, I found that the artists who were really passionate, that like were what you'd call like a true artist, what they wanted more than anything was to communicate. They wanted a platform from which they could speak. They had something they wanted to say. You know, this is quite different from like the Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys and all the manufactured pop music that's taken over. In a world where distribution is broken and distribution is being controlled by a couple of companies that are trying to make their earnings announcements, you end up with a lot more. The balance shifts towards that manufactured music. But with true artists, they primarily wanted to be heard. So the question for them is not, how do we get unfathomably wealthy? You know, how do we become a rock star and make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars? Which
they don't do that anymore.
They don't do. They don't. Part of the answer to this question, and I would have these meetings with established artists who would say, "Well, you know, look at this yacht that you're on. How could I get this yacht with the new model?" And unfortunately, for certain artists who I won't name who happen to have me on their yacht, the answer is you won't. But what will happen is you're going to get a lot more artists who are able to communicate what it is that they want to communicate. So if they're in it for the purity of their desire to communicate and make a statement, the current model, even with distribution and the record labels as broken as they are, the current model is actually a lot more successful model. These days, as a new artist, you can, without any distribution, without any record deal, you can build yourself up, you can make a name for yourself, you can make a brand, you can put your music online and maybe make a little bit of money, and you can ultimately succeed as a touring artist. You never need to sign with a record label to build an audience and succeed as a touring artist. You know, in some ways, all of this technology has put us back to the Renaissance era or medieval times when bards and minstrels were wandering the countryside, you know, playing shows for anyone who was willing to feed them.
Good image. Can I suggest a kind of...
I feel like that statement is somehow going to come back to haunt me.
There is a lady watching us here. Did you see the lady? Only Sean and I can see.
Oh, yes.
I would suggest something. We are getting a little bit too formal. What I suggest is that I shoot one question and you answer in 1 minute. You shoot one question and I answer in 1 minute.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Are you happy with the movie?
Why is it that I sort of thought it didn't come up in our preliminary conversation? Maybe Paulo hasn't seen the movie. And maybe I'm going to get off. So okay, well...
1 minute.
One minute. So I have deep respect for David Fincher. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. He's technically doing things that no other filmmaker is doing. I mean, the film is beautifully shot. Cinematography is amazing. It's just a gorgeous film. It feels incredibly timely. It feels of the moment. It's a complete work of fiction. I actually enjoyed watching it.
You don't need to elaborate. If you enjoy to watch it.
The most frustrating thing about the film, from my perspective, is that it's not the scene in the end where there's like, you know, a party and drug use occurring. I kind of wish my life were that cool. I'm a geek from Silicon Valley, and there are no Victoria's Secret models in Silicon Valley. Anyone who's ever been to a club in Silicon Valley should realize that there are no if you walked through the streets of San Francisco with a Victoria's Secret model, there would be people like on their hands and knees at your feet. I mean, this doesn't happen. So that wasn't the part of the movie that frustrated me. The part of the movie that frustrated me is actually the scene at the end where like the character played by Justin Timberlake, who happens to have my name, basically writes a check to Eduardo, who I consider Eduardo a friend of mine, and I'm one of the few people at Facebook who still interacts with Eduardo, and throws it in his face and has security escort him out of the building. And I mean, that's just rude. I mean, this guy in the movie he's a morally reprehensible human being.
Which, okay, you don't need to elaborate too much. It's your time.
Shoot.
To shoot me also a very provocative question.
I really ran with that.
Please.
Oh, okay. Now I ask you a question. Let's see. This is not going to be a provocative question, but how has your following, your audience on Twitter, changed the way you promote your books, and has it affected your sales?
Good question, very good question, but it's not very provocative. I had a very concrete experience with the release of my new book, Aleph. At the end of the day, giving interviews is very boring. You repeat the same question over and over again. What is your inspiration comes from? What's your next project? Tell me about your book. You don't need to tell about your book. You wrote the book.
Right.
You understand? Read the book. Huh?
Sometimes you feel like you'd be better served by a tape recorder.
Yeah. What is the message of the book? Message you put in a Twitter, 140 characters. Right. To write a book is something much more complex. So I decided to release the book without interviews, without any type of promotion, except Facebook and Twitter. And it was an astonishing success. My agent's here. I did not give a single interview. I did not do anything, but I have this huge following in Twitter and in Facebook. I have, I think, 4 million, 200,000 in Facebook and 1 million in Twitter. So I put there, new book. This is part of the new book. Discuss the new book. And for this, I think that in the past 5 years, I did not get a first place in the bestseller list. This time, without one single interview, without one single promotion trip, without one single signing session, I made the book #1 in Brazil.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Besides the fact that it's also a very good book.
And at the end of the day, that still has something to do with it. As much as all the PR people who would try to set you up with interviews, and as much as the press, though the press has been seeming kind of deflated lately for some reason. But as much as these people would try to tell you that that's the most important thing, you've got to promote it, you've got to market it right, and as much as the Lady Gagas of the world would seem to indicate that all of that self-promotional stuff and all this harnessing of technology and constantly taking photographs, as much as that may seem like the most important thing, at the end of the day, content still matters.
Absolutely.
I hope so. What I got from what you just said was that freedom is actually really important. Freedom to focus on the things that are important, like creating good art and writing a great book and having a relationship with your audience gives you the freedom not to worry about all that other stuff. Because it's so tempting once you get a good thing going, to just sort of get sucked into the system and kind of mechanically go through the motions that's required to maintain your audience and continue to sell books. And you get really caught up in that system. And I think it pulls you away from the creative work. Not as someone who doesn't build content or make art, I know this even as a business person because I create companies, and I feel like I've at times you get pulled away from the creative work of actually designing your product, and you get so caught up in all of that other hoopla, all of that buzz, all of that hype, all the people, and it becomes a lot easier to sort of just coast. So on the one hand, technology lets you be lazy, so you don't have to do all that nonsense work that your father told you were going to have to do at some point. But it also gives you freedom.
Yeah, it's my turn. I think we have 3 minutes, right?
Can we do questions?
No, it is my turn to ask you a question, and I'm going to answer the same question. And then we end with a kind of golden key. Because when we were upstairs, Sean asked me, are you going to interview me? And I said, no. Are you going to interview me? I said, no, this is a panel, we have to talk.
Well, then I said, am I going to interview you?
Yeah. So the final question here that both of us are going to answer in 1 minute, and I'm going to ask you, then you ask me, huh? Are you happy?
Ooh. I think mostly, and I think a lot of, I'm happiest when I'm able to focus on the things that I'm really good at, and I'm not forced to do the things that I'm not as good at. Are you happy?
No.
Are you ever happy?
I'm never happy. I think that happiness is like Sunday afternoon without DLD, because on Sunday it is afternoon, but there is DLD. You are there, you have plenty of time, but you don't know what to do. So it was not one of my goals to be happy. One of my goals in life, it was to have challenges. It was to have joy. At the end of the day, it was to have fun, which I still have, and I'm sure you still have, in the sense that you and I were never satisfied. We're never happy. We need the next step. We need the next mountain to climb. We needed to take this pebble off our shoes and continue walking. So we made not only a brilliant conversation, but we were in time.
I think we've actually got a minute left.
Yeah. That is the boss, Hubert Burda. He can do anything. Not ask permission, just get it.
What is the difference if you read a book on paper or if you read it on an e-book?
No difference for me.
No difference?
No, there is one difference. It's easy to carry, the e-book. So I have here a Kindle. I'm reading a very interesting book by an author from New Yorker called The Looming Tower. And I have another 5 or 6 books, just in case that we get nothing to do in Davos, which I don't think is going to happen. But I'm carrying only one Kindle. And people, they say, oh, the smell and opening the page and bookmarking. I think a book as the old format is the same, it's gone. Like papyrus.
Why can't we romanticize the present? Why is it that we seem so incapable of romanticizing the present? We're always romanticizing the past and the smell of the pages in the book and romanticizing past movements in music and literature. But isn't the world cool now?
You are totally right. But I don't want to read a book in papyrus. The format, the book format that we have today is fantastic. But when you have an e-book that you move forward and back, so my first decision against all my publishers, including my German one, it was I'm going to put all my books in Kindle, in Portuguese, in German, in English. No, in English they were there. So I said, and now someone in Ivory Coast can download the Portuguese book. As you said before about this distribution thing, they can download the Portuguese book. If they have a Kindle, they can download in the middle of United States in Portuguese.
I'm Robert Scoble, and thank you to both of you for making my life magical. What are the things that you find are magical? Like I have this app called Word Lens that I put on Spanish text, and while it's aiming at Spanish text, it translates it to English. What in your life is magical that way?
You mean technologically speaking or in general?
In general, take it technical
No, technological for me is very important because for the first time, an author can have a contact with his readers, direct contact. They answer, they ask, I answer, etc. So I know it's not that it's changed my way of writing. They are my readers because I write that way. But the most magical thing is to go 2 o'clock in the morning, switch the computer, read my public mailbox, and say, oh my God, they can understand my soul. And your magic.
I mean, for me, it's like this. It's the really simple things. Like I think the reason I like to build like platforms and as opposed to like specific applications is that just connectedness. It's really the same answer that Paulo's given. Just it's like being able to maintain contact with hundreds of people all at once. I mean, I guess it's a little dizzying at times, and it can. But there's something magical about that. Seeing just. Like the two most important features that were ever deployed by Facebook were the photos feature and the feed. And platform and internationalization and all these other features, they were really important, but the most controversial features in the beginning were actually photos and feed. Photos was controversial internally because everybody was like, there's a million photo sharing sites out there, why do we need this? And our theory was, well, it's going to work better on a social network. It's a whole different ball game when we build it on the graph. So it was like really hard to get that done. You had to convince people that this sort of obvious thing was a good idea. And then, feed was controversial to the world. I mean, there was this huge backlash against it. And if you think Facebook is a stubborn company today and you think that they want it their way or the highway, you need look no further than what happened with feed, because that's where that culture came from. Because Mark rolled out the product, and we said, okay, this is going to be controversial. And we were right. But it blew over because people eventually realized the power, the utility of it.
Shervin Pishavar, I have a question for both of you. First of all, both of you are heroes of mine. The Alchemist to me, changed my life, and I think it has a revolutionary message. And at the same time, Sean, you have worked on multiple things that are revolutionary, from Napster to Spotify to Facebook, that are revolutionary platforms. It's my dream in my lifetime to see dictators in the world be a dying breed. The problem is that dictatorship, the last bastion of dictatorship, is the router. As we've seen what's happening in Tunisia right now, this second, for people yearning to have freedom, I'd love to have your thoughts about how we can use platforms like Facebook and Twitter to help spread freedom around the world. Thank you.
I think you wanted to hear our thoughts about it. Shall we start?
No, you start.
Okay.
Yeah. Please. No. We can answer as many questions. Sunday afternoon, remember?
No. This was unfortunately,
Oh.
this was the last question.
Okay. So I think the first thing is that people need to realize that they're empowered. I think that's the first thing that needs to change. I mean, as a thought experiment. What if every single user on Twitter decided that they're only going to say, they're not going to say anything mean for 1 week? And people on Twitter, they spend a lot of time saying nasty things. They're like weirdly critical. Everybody, it's like you give somebody a soapbox and they get up there and they just like criticize everyone. I think it's like that little lion inside of people that finally gets a chance to roar because now they can say something, and they get up and they say a bunch of mean stuff. If everyone just used the platform to say positive things, to disrupt the apple cart when it's necessary, criticize the wrongdoings of the world and the bad behavior of the world and so forth, but to just like skew it in a positive direction, I think everyone's experience of the world would be more positive. Now, we can't expect everyone to do that. It just sort of defies human nature to force everyone to be positive. But what we can start to do is encourage people to use the medium to actually have a positive impact, to wake up and realize that they are now, for the first time in human history, empowered on a scale beyond their face-to-face interactions with 1 or 2 or 3 or a dozen or so people every day. And that could be a sea change event in history, or it may not be.
I totally agree with Sean. I think I don't have anything to add. Yes, my only fear is to dilute the message when people start talking instead of concentrating. But I would like to thank DLG, Steffi, for this opportunity to be here with, I'm not a stakeholder in any of her companies, so this comes from the bottom of my heart. I really admire you as a human being. Thank you for being who you are.
Thank you so much. Likewise.